Hey everyone, in this one I'm going to be solving October-November 2020 question paper 13, 2281, Cambridge O-Level Economics. This is paper 1, it's a multiple choice exam, and you're going to be given 30 MCQs to complete in 45 minutes. It's also important that you read the instructions and the information on the cover page of the exam before starting. Assuming that you've done so, let's get started. So, question number 1. Why do consumers have to make choices when spending their income? So this one is actually dealing with the idea and the foundation behind opportunity cost and the reason and the need to make choices. So we're looking for a solid reason here. A says advertising encourages consumers spending. This is only implying the need for spending and not for choices. So we're going to cross that out. Consumers have unlimited incomes. Well, if they had unlimited incomes, they would have an unlimited potential to buy or unlimited purchasing power. So there wouldn't be a need to make choices. They could very superlatively afford everything, so they won't have to make a choice. Hence, B is not the answer. Let's look at D. D is not all products will be attractive to customers. This is a true idea, but it's very, very vague. Hence, not a very solid reason why consumers have to make choices. Whereas C, consumer wants cannot all be satisfied with their income, gives us a solid reason. Consumer wants cannot all be satisfied with their income means that their income, their disposable income, their purchasing power is limited, and so they can afford limited products and limited goods and services. So they can afford to satisfy a limited amount of wants. So they need to prioritize those wants. Of course, needs will and have to be met. However, wants, they can be prioritized and then choice can be made. So C is the correct answer. Let's move on. Question 2. What is the key role of an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is a part of enterprise, and as we know, enterprise is the one who makes key decisions in a business and takes the risk. So that's the main job of an entrepreneur. A says inventor. Well, an entrepreneur can start a firm or start a business that sells or that deals with a already existing product. So it's not necessary that the entrepreneur has to come up with a very different and a very new idea. They can enter into an already competitive market. So that is also possible. Hence, an inventor is not the key role of an entrepreneur. Risk taker is the key role of an entrepreneur. C and D are also not the answers. As shareholder, it's not necessary for an entrepreneur to be a shareholder. A manager who is actually making key decisions, a really top-notch director, may also be an entrepreneur. So it is also not necessary. However, an entrepreneur is usually the shareholder of the business. If it's a company. However, in a sole trader or in a partnership, in an unincorporated business, it's also possible for an entrepreneur to be the complete owner of the business and not have a certain share in the business. So this is not the key role. A worker, an entrepreneur, may work or may not work in the business. It's not necessary, so it's not the key role. Question 3. This is a question related to production possibility curves. It's also called production possibility frontiers. This is a very essential paper, essential question in almost any economics exam. So it's really, really essential that you know how to work your way across a PPC and PPC diagram. You should also know what concepts can be linked with PPCs. For example, opportunity cost. You should know how to work your way with that. So, and this is a question related to opportunity cost, so it's really, really important that you do this topic in detail. The question says, the diagram shows the production possibility curve, PPC, of an economy producing at X. So this is the current point at which this economy is producing, X. What would be the opportunity cost of moving from point X to produce only consumer goods? So they're saying a movement along the PPC curve from point X to this point right here. I'm going to name this Y. It's not necessary to name this, but I'm just going to name this for ease. A movement along X to Y, only producing consumer goods. Here at this point, at point Y, there are 0 capital goods produced. So this is the point that we're moving to. What would be the opportunity cost? Now remember, opportunity cost is the next best alternative foregone by choosing another item or another option. Here, what we're choosing is only producing consumer goods. So basically, we're going to reduce the production of 70 units. First, at point X, we were producing 70 of capital goods and 180 of consumer goods. Now we're producing up to a full potential in 240 of consumer goods and none of capital goods. So we're basically not producing 70 capital goods, and we're letting this opportunity go. So this is the opportunity cost, 70 units of capital goods, which is B. Now these sort of calculation and numerical multiple choice questions are usually very, very specific, so it's easy to find an answer, and there is no need for eliminating as we did here. So these are, when you get a hang of it, these are easier as compared to these theory ones, because these can often be confusing. Whereas these are pretty easy to work around. You can just apply the formula, or you can calculate, analyze, and then you get your exact answer. It could be this or it could be not. So that's how we go around that. We have question number 4. Economics is divided into 2, microeconomics and macroeconomics. These are the 2 types. Statement 1 says, when the price of oil falls, there's an expansion in demand. Now this is specific, and there's an expansion in demand. This is looking like a micro statement, since this is very specific and it's not overall to the whole economy or economies if you're talking about more than one. So this is a micro statement. Whereas this, statement 2, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, these are a number of economies, can influence the price of oil. Now this may be a little confusing, since we're talking about a lot of economies. However, we're talking about the price of oil in specific. The data is the price of oil. So this is also a micro statement. It is an individual industry. It's not the overall performance or the overall prices. So this is micro and this is micro as well. We're going to find an option that suits that. Micro and micro. D. What is a disadvantage of a market economic system? Now disadvantage, the word not, all these sort of words and takes on an MCQ are particularly very, very tricky. They can be tricky, since candidates, they can overlook the word not or the dis in the advantage and actually circle the wrong answer. So it's really important that you read and underline the question really, really carefully in order to highlight that specific detail in the question for you, and you can actually then eventually circle the right answer and shade it in the answer sheet correctly. So, the disadvantage of a market economic system, we're going to actually now look at any advantages, and then we're going to cross them out first If not, then we're going to continue. So first of all, entrepreneurs lack incentives to produce what consumers want. Well, that is not true, since there are less government regulations in a market economy, and so entrepreneurs do not lack incentives to produce what consumers want. And plus, there's a whole drive, there's a consumer sovereignty in a market economic system. Hence, they do not lack incentives. There's high profitability in many industries. So A is not the answer. Government intervention would reduce efficiency of firm. Even by reading the first two words, that is government intervention, we can stop right there, since this is the market economic system. It's not a planned economic system. It's not a communist economy. This is market economic system where government intervention is at minimum, and government intervention will reduce the efficiency of firms. That is not what we're looking for. That can happen though in a mixed economic system. D. There is an underproduction of demerit goods. That is absolutely not true. In a market economic system is driven by the market forces of demand and supply. So if there is a high demand of demerit goods, which is likely to be, since there are demerit goods, consumers overconsume them, and so there is likely to be an overproduction of demerit goods instead of an underproduction. That is true in the case of a planned economy though, so D is not the answer. C. Market dominance by firms can lead to higher prices. Well, that is true, since there is no government intervention, so market dominance is very, very likely. And so if there is a monopoly and market dominance by firms, they can take advantage of an inelastic demand or lack of choices, and they can raise prices. So there is a disadvantage right here. Question number 6. The diagram shows the demand curve for coffee in the US. Coffee is very, very popular in the demand questions. But anyways, the diagram shows the demand curve for coffee in the US. This is the price, and this is the quantity. This is 0. This is all the changes. Now, why did the quantity demanded move from Q1 to Q2? Q1 to Q2. Now, this is a movement along the demand curve. It's not a shift in demand curve in any direction. So that is what can be confused really easily. It's a very confusing topic. Candidates often get confused between shifts and movements, and it's really, really tricky sometimes in MCQs, especially when you have a number of really, really tempting options. So we got to look out for that. This is a movement, and it is absolutely essential that you know that price doesn't change the curve. Price affects a movement along the demand curve. And here there is a movement, so there's obviously something with the price. So we have to look at the price. The price is decreasing, so coffee is actually becoming cheaper, which is coincidentally the answer. B is incomes rose in the US. Incomes is again a determinant of demand. It does not affect a movement. There was a successful advertising campaign. Price of substitutes for coffee rose. These all are very, very true as determinants of demand and not as an influence to price. Moving on. Okay, now this is a large question. It's a very big question. This needs to be underlined and analyzed carefully. So first of all, in an African country with large areas of tropical desert, the price elasticity of demand for salt is highly inelastic. This will result in greater consumer expenditure on salt, when price changes from P1 to P2. Which diagram illustrates the situation? If you have been paying attention in the topic PED or PES, you should know the diagrammatical or the visual representation of an inelastic demand or an inelastic supply. So this should be very easy to you. But if you were to look into this a little bit more deeper, considering this thing that they have mentioned to us, that when price changes from P1 to P2, like when price rises, there will be a greater consumer expenditure. This is your average demand curve, so this is not the answer for a highly inelastic demand. Then we have B. This causes a huge change in quantity, which is for an elastic demand. And you can also see that this is a very, very steep, flat demand curve, so it's more elastic. So this is not the answer as well. We have C, which causes no quantity demanded at price P2, so this is not the answer as well. We have then P1 and P2 rise, and over here we have a very, very little change in the quantity demanded, so this is an inelastic demand. In which occupation would wages tend to increase? Well, for one, wages increase for the jobs and the occupations in which supply is low, and when the work done is worth a lot. So we're going to look for that. A is in those where a worker is paid weekly. Well, it's not essential for the wages to increase when a worker is paid weekly. A weekly wage is still a weekly wage. B is in those where a worker needs less training. Well, in those where a worker needs less training, the work is worth less. So the wages are not likely to increase. C is in those where there is an excess demand for labor. The firms want that particular candidate or that particular person to do their jobs, to fill the vacancies in their firms. For example, an accountant. Mostly people go on the medical or in the engineering side, and accountants are lesser, and there is more need for accountants, so their wages would tend to increase, and hence this is a pretty good answer. D is in those where work becomes less dangerous, the work is worth less, so this is not the answer either. 9. Which row shows a characteristic of money and a function of money? Now there is a very, very distinctive difference between these two. A characteristic of money is not the same as a function of money. A function of money is what the money does, the task or the job that the money does, and characteristic of money is what is needed for money, what is needed of money for that particular function. So we need something in money to do something in the economy. So we have to find that. Characteristic is never cash. Cash is not a characteristic. Store of value is also not a characteristic. This is a function that the money performs. A and C are characteristics, so these can be our answers, but we have to narrow it down using the function column. We have medium of exchange, which is a function, so this is the answer. Measure of value, portability, bank deposit, these are already eliminated using the characteristic. However, divisibility is the characteristic, and portability is also another characteristic and not a function. So C is also not the answer. This is also a very popular question. The table shows how household spending changes with income. This is the income and this is the spending. We have to make a separate savings column. What is the lowest level of incomes at which savings are positive? So we have to make a savings column and we have to calculate all these, and the calculated ones are negative 150, negative 75, and 100. And the lowest level of income at which savings are positive over here as well, from here as well. However, this is the lowest income at which savings are positive, that is 100. So 3600 B is their correct answer. What can a central bank increase in order to reduce consumer borrowing? Now, there are some MCQs that are repeated here. They are in the previous variant as well. So if you want to check the other variant as well, the link is in the description box, as well as the link to the syllabus so you can match out the concepts that you've learned and the concepts that are left before you attempt a paper. To reduce consumer borrowing, it can increase interest rate, which is answer D right here. By increasing interest rate, if an individual or a group borrows a sum, it has to pay a higher rate of interest. So it will actually discourage consumer borrowing and hence reduce it. The exchange rate, government spending, commercial bank deposits, these are all things that do not affect consumer spending at all. Question 12. The table shows the total cost of a firm at each level of output. So this is the output levels and these are the total cost. At which level of output does the total variable cost exceed total fixed cost? First of all, we have to find the total fixed cost. Total fixed cost is the cost that does not change or does not vary with the output. It remains even if the output is 0. And here is the cost that fulfills this definition, and hence it is the total fixed cost. At which level of output does total variable cost exceed? So we're going to make a separate column of total variable cost. Here it's none. Here it is 5. Take away 3, it's 2. Here it's 3. And here it is 6. And at which level of output does variable cost exceed total fixed cost? Over here it's 3, since exceeding it by 6 units, $6 or whatever currency it is. So this is the best answer here. Here as well it's doing, however, by a really less amount. And here is the most, it exceeds the most. So we have to pick the best answer, and hence we're going to pick D. A firm has fixed costs of 1,000. The table shows variable costs at different levels of output. We have different levels of output. This is the variable cost. The fixed costs are mentioned as 1,000. If the goods are sold for 500 each, this is the selling price. How much profit will be made from a sale of 4 units? Profit formula is total revenue, take away total cost. We're going to calculate total cost as first. Total cost is fixed cost plus the variable cost. Variable cost at 4 units is $350, hence total cost is $1,350. Now for the total revenue. Total revenue is the selling price into the total output produced. We have 500 into 4, which is going to give us 2,000 as our total revenue. 2,000. And that'll give us, if we subtract total cost from total revenue, that'll give us 650. And this is the answer. Again, a very specific numerical question and very easy. Which combination is usually found in a monopoly? Now remember, a monopoly is when there's a single firm that's selling and there are many buyers. And so a monopoly has this unfair advantage over everyone. They can charge higher prices, they can reduce the quality, and obviously the amount of choices available for the consumers will be less. So a monopoly is not a very good situation in a market. So we're going to pick up what combination. They've given us the amount for buyers and sellers, and we know that there's a single seller, so we're going to cross out the options with many sellers. That's competition. Single seller is the one we're going for. Single buyer and single seller are not the case, and hence it's B. What is usually considered to be an advantage of a firm using division of labor? Division of labor is a type of specialization. And A says high labor turnover. Now remember, this is a type of disadvantage, and we're talking about something that benefits, an advantage. So we're going to cross out all the disadvantages. The need for quality control is also not the answer, because the firm will have to spend more, so it's sort of like a disadvantage, a con. C is movement of labor between tasks. That is not the case, since every worker will be specialized. A worker will be having a specific JD, that is job description. They will have to do a specific task only that they're specialized in, and there will not be requirement for any movement between tasks. Increased mechanization does happen by using division of labor. People will be more specialized, they will know how to use machinery, and the firm will be more likely to use specialized machinery as well. 16 is, what are two aims that a government normally pursues when managing the performance of the total economy? This is from the chapter Government Aims and Objectives. So we're looking for real practical aims here. We have 16A, to encourage an increase in production and to prevent high inflation. Prevent high inflation is also practical, and to encourage an increase in production is also very, very practical, hence is the answer. B is to ensure no one is unemployed and to reduce exports. To reduce exports still makes sense. However, no one is unemployed, it's a bit impractical. There's always going to be a little bit of unemployment, even in developed countries, even if it's frictionally unemployed between different jobs, a person is unemployed, so there's not really practical to go after that. B is not the answer. C is to give everyone equal incomes. This is also something that a mixed economy cannot pursue, and since they're not talking about a planned economy, it's not what can be gone after. This is a very communist concept, so if we were talking about a communist China or the Soviet Union, then we would have thought about it as a possibility. However, it's not the case here. To protect the environment and to reduce interest rates. The interest rates, the high interest rates, actually, as we saw above as well, it discourages or reduces consumer borrowing, and so it may not be essentially what the government is going after. What is most likely to be a responsibility of the central government? The provision of tickets inspectors, the provision of security staff, the provision of security cameras. These all are very low-level jobs, responsibilities. So the central government is going to do something like provision of immigration officials at an airport, something that the central government can do. A government decrees the tax on all goods produced in the country. That is the indirect taxes. Subsidies and taxation is, again, a really important chapter in O-level economics. So make sure you do that before the exam. Indirect taxes. What is most likely the consequence of this? An increase in production is the answer. Since when the tax will be decreased, the things will become cheaper, people will demand more, and there will be a higher profitability in the goods. So there will be an increase in production, an increase in imports, a decrease in exports, a worsening of balance of trade in goods are not something that can actually happen. There is a possibility, but they're not most likely. Another really tricky word. Hence, they've done it bold as well. Which government policy measure could cause an increase in country supply of labor? So we're actually looking at something that can cause an increase in the working population of the economy. Increasing unemployment benefits would cause people to retire early, and there will be a less working population. So this is not the answer. B is lowering interest rates. It does not affect the supply of labor, so this is not the answer. Raising an income tax is going to, again, not encourage people to keep working. Raise the age of retirement is going to actually cause an increase in the supply of labor, since people will retire later on in their lifetime and more people will be actually employed in work. So the working population will be high, the supply of labor will be high as well. 20. Due to an increase in the number of retired people, there has been increased demand for some government expenditure. So there are more number of retired people, there are more elderly people, and so which type of government expenditure is most likely to be affected? Well, if we were to answer this without actually looking at the options, it would probably be health services or unemployment benefits, and here health services is listed, so we're going to select that. Street lighting, retraining grants, defense are not something that can be demanded. Retraining grants is a little bit confusing. Retraining grants cannot actually affect the government expenditure, since people are retired, they cannot work, they're elderly, so retraining cannot actually affect that. The diagrams show Italy's unemployment rate. Italy's unemployment rate and GDP per head. These are graphs. Now, in an economics exam, we need to be able to read basic graphs, basic line graphs, bar graphs, maybe pie charts. So it's really, really important that you have these basic data skills. It's usually covered in GCSE or IGCSE mathematics. So you can ask your math teacher to help you out if you lack in any of these skills, because then you won't be able to solve many of these MCQs in your exam. And also the data response case study in paper 2. If you want me to solve paper 2 as well, the whole paper, then you can comment down below and I will be also solving that as well. Okay, so the diagram shows unemployment rate and GDP per head in the form of line graphs, and when do Italy's unemployment rate and GDP per head rise at the same time? So if we're looking for a rise in unemployment and GDP per head, we're going to look here. 2000 and 2001 is going to be right about here. Here the unemployment is decreasing, and they want unemployment and GDP per head both at the same time to rise, so A is not the answer. 2007, 2008, 2007 is right about here, 2008 is here, and same over here. An increase and an increase, so this is the answer. 2009 and 2010 are right about here. And here unemployment is rising and GDP per head is falling, so that's not the answer as well. 2004, 2015, 2014, and 2015. Again, a decrease, so not what we're going for. An economy is experiencing rising prices, that is inflation. Which government policy will help reduce consumer expenditure? By introducing compulsory saving for income earners will actually cause them to save more, and so less of their disposable income is going to be left for expenditure. So this is the actually correct answer. Investing more in building infrastructure, issuing more banknotes and coins is going to cause inflation, reducing indirect taxes. It's not going to actually affect and reduce consumer expenditure. Some goods take a greater percentage of a typical household's total spending than others. If you've read and studied in the topic inflation, and you read about retail price indices or consumer price indices, or the basket of goods, you should be able to answer this easily. How is this accounted for in the construction of a consumer prices index? By giving a weight to the goods, by deducting the goods, by giving average price fluctuations, by using price elasticity. These are all things that don't matter here. One of the indicators of living standards in the human development index. Now this is a measure for living standards. You should be able to be proficient in the topic living standards. Living standards contain some indices like Human Development Index developed by Dr. Mehboob Haq, and maybe GPI as well, and some happiness indicators, etc. These all are indices with different factors and different things taken into consideration, and right now we're talking about the HDI. What is not taken into consideration when calculating the HDI? HDI considers education, it considers GDP per head or income per head. We have consideration of life expectancy in HDI. However, we don't have consideration of level of savings. Which factor in the words low-income countries limits their economic development? Another repetition in the variant. We have a balance of payment surplus. That's not what we see in low-income countries. High saving ratios. Low-income countries have low GDP per capita, low income per head, and so low disposable income, and most of it, higher proportion of it, is going to be spended rather than saved. So there's no high saving ratios. Large inflows of foreign investment is going to make it a high income country, which it is not. Rapid population growth is something that we can see in the world's low income countries, so that's the correct answer. 26 is the table shows the percentage employment in primary, secondary, and service sectors in 4 countries. What is most developed? Another repetition. Most developed countries have the highest employment in service sector, the second highest in the secondary sector, and the lowest in the primary sector, which is country A. All others are imbalanced in this regard. Question 27. What would not be included in the current account of balance of payments? The purchase of a house in another country wouldn't be included because it's done in another country, whereas imports, dividends earned, rents paid to owners of a land in another country are all exchanges of income transfers, current transfers. We have imports, the outflows. These are all included in the current account of balance of payments. So these are not the answer. What is most likely to discourage international specialization in trade for an economy? Decreasing labor supply, decreasing transport costs, increasing oil prices, and increasing trade barriers. The discouragements and the barriers for international trade are always these trade barriers, which is import quotas and import tariffs, embargoes, all these things. So this is the answer. increasing oil prices, decreasing transport costs, decreasing labor supply, all these are not actually going to discourage international specialization in trade. Decreasing transport costs is actually going to encourage. Decreasing labor supply is actually going to encourage the employment of foreign labor. Increasing oil prices is going to increase the profitability, and so there are going to be more firms and more trade internationally. Then we have many low-income countries rely on MNCs, multinational companies, to provide economic development. What is the disadvantage for this for a low-income country? Local firms close because MNC is more efficient. That is a different disadvantage, and MNCs are more efficient. Local firms are not be able to compete because they're low-income countries, low investment. B is new production techniques are introduced. This is an advantage. The balance of payments may improve. This is also an advantage. The MNCs have to pay taxes on their profits, another advantage. Again, we have to cross out the advantages and look for a disadvantage. This is an easy one. The diagram shows the value of countries' exports and imports of goods over 5 years. Between which 2 years did the country have an increase in the value of imports? Increase in the value of imports means that this gray bar needs to increase, and an improvement in the balance of trade in goods. Balance of trade is the difference between exports and imports of goods. So we have to calculate the balance of trade as well as see and observe an increase in the value of imports. So here the value of imports is decreasing, so 4 and 5 is not the answer. 1 and 2, well, the value of imports is increasing. However, if we calculate the balance of trade, the difference between exports and imports is greater here and lesser here. So there is not an improvement, but the other way around. So A is not the answer as well. 2 and 3, well, the imports are increasing and the balance of trade, if calculated, that is 20, and somewhere around here it's 17 or 16. So it's around $3 million balance of trade, and this is actually 25, and this is and this one is 22. So around, sorry, it's 23 or 24. So it's around 2 and 1. Let's take a 2. Still, it's not an improvement, so B is not the answer. C is the answer, since here the balance of trade is balance of trade is 2, and here it is improving, as the balance of trade is 30 take away 5, that is 5. So the balance of trade is really improving, definitely improving here. So C is the answer. And we're done. Plus, these are all the answers for the questions that we just solved. So if you've been solving along, you can check your answers right here. This is the mark scheme. And here. I hope you got most of them correct. If you did, keep doing it like that. And if not, then keep practicing and revising basic concepts. And once you do 5 to 6 papers, it's really likely that you are getting the flow of the exam and you'll be able to solve them, because after a few exams you'll start to realize that most of the things are in the same pattern. It's a specific pattern that the paper comes in, and if you target your improving in that specific pattern and in those MCQs, you'll be likely in achieving that specific grade or goal that you're going after. So these are the answers, and I'll see you in the next variant. Keep watching and keep solving.